At this construction site, a crane was being used to lift a massive wall panel. Everything looked steady as the load was lowered into position, but suddenly the heavy panel shifted off balance. It toppled sideways with a violent crash. Dust filled the air, and anyone nearby could have been crushed. This incident shows why exclusion zones around crane lifts are critical. Workers should never stand under or beside a suspended load, and supervisors must enforce strict lifting procedures at all times. The forklift approached the gate, with two workers dangerously riding on the sides. As it tilted, a woman rushed forward to help, but the heavy machine toppled onto her, trapping her underneath. This shows why forklifts must never carry passengers, and why no one should ever try to catch a tipping vehicle. Step back, stay clear, and let proper safety controls do the job. A massive transformer, weighing several tons, was being carefully lifted into place by a mobile crane. At first, everything looked steady. The operator controlled the lift smoothly, while ground workers guided the load from below. But then, the balance shifted. The weight was too much for the crane's support. Slowly, at first, the entire machine began to tilt. And in just seconds, the crane was pulled violently off balance. Its wheels lifted off the ground until the entire truck was pointing straight into the air. Workers panicked, rushing in as the operator was left hanging inside the tilted cab. Fortunately, quick action allowed him to climb out safely before things got worse. But this near disaster shows the brutal force of physics when cranes are overloaded or set on unstable ground. Heavy lifts require more than just raw power. They demand planning, solid outriggers, proper counterweights, and a clear safety perimeter for everyone on site. Because when things go wrong, there are no second chances. A forklift operator approaches, carrying a heavy metal rack. At first, the load seems steady, but as he edges closer to the workstation, the rack tilts forward. In an instant, it topples off the forks and crashes directly onto a worker standing nearby. The impact knocks him down as the massive frame pins him underneath. Panic spreads. Co-workers rush in, unsure how badly he's hurt. The operator jumps from the forklift, desperate to help. Seconds feel like hours, until the team finally scrambles to lift the weight off him. This incident is a chilling reminder that one moment of imbalance can cause life-changing injuries. Forklifts must never be overloaded. Workers must stay clear of suspended loads, and safety zones should always be enforced to prevent tragedies like this. In a busy factory, workers were stationed near a massive steel coil suspended overhead by a crane. At first, everything seemed under control. The coil swung gently as the hook carried it across the floor. But then disaster struck. The heavy load shifted violently, breaking free from its balance. In an instant, the giant roll swung sideways, slamming into the group of workers standing nearby. Moments like this expose the brutal risk of poor load handling. Heavy materials must always be secured. Clear zones must be enforced, and workers should never be allowed in the path of suspended loads. One mistake, one lapse in safety, can turn an ordinary day into a life-threatening nightmare. A worker parks his forklift and casually steps away. But he forgets one crucial thing. The forklift is still in gear. Slowly, it begins to roll forward. At first it looks harmless, just drifting. But in seconds it picks up speed, heading straight for the wall. The worker notices too late. The forklift slams into the barrier hard, just inches from where he was standing. This close call shows why forklifts must always be powered down, parking brakes set before stepping away. One careless mistake can turn into disaster in seconds. Two workers were guiding a heavy load suspended from a hoist. At first, everything looked under control as they pulled it out from the machine. But then, the weight shifted suddenly, dragging one of the men down with it. He was pulled off balance and slammed to the ground, trapped by the swinging load. This close call shows how dangerous it is to handle suspended weights by hand. Loads should only be guided with tag lines, proper rigging, and safe distance. Because once gravity takes over, human strength is no match. A crane was brought in to lift a heavy excavator onto a flatbed truck. At first, everything looked steady as the load dangled above the road. Workers guided it carefully, trying to align the machine with the truck bed. But then, the weight began to shift. The crane's boom leaned further and further, struggling to hold balance. Within moments, the entire crane tipped, its massive frame crashing down with unstoppable force. The impact shook the ground and sent workers scrambling to safety. This is what happens when lifting limits are ignored, or when the ground beneath a crane isn't properly stabilized. Heavy machinery requires precise load calculations, strong rigging, and solid support before a lift begins. One wrong move, one overlooked detail, and thousands of pounds of steel can come crashing down. It's a reminder that in heavy lifting, there's no room for error. A massive crane barge was in the middle of lifting a huge bridge section over a narrow canal. At first, everything looked steady. The crane swayed slightly, but the load seemed under control. But as the heavy structure shifted, the balance was thrown off. Slowly, then suddenly, the entire barge tilted under the crushing weight. The crane couldn't hold, and in a terrifying chain reaction, the whole rig toppled sideways. In seconds, tons of steel and machinery crashed into the houses lining the canal. What began as a precision lift turned into complete devastation. This disaster is a brutal reminder. Lifting operations near urban areas demand flawless planning, stronger supports, and absolute respect for load limits. One mistake can bring down everything. Inside a busy factory, workers moved around their stations like any other day. Machines hummed, sparks flew, and everything seemed routine. But then, a sudden flash lit up the floor. In an instant, a massive electrical arc ripped across the room, scattering blinding sparks. The workers closest to the surge jumped back in shock, scrambling for safety as the current tore through equipment. It all unfolded in seconds, turning a normal shift into chaos. This is why high-voltage environments demand strict inspections, grounding systems, and protective gear. Because when electricity strikes without warning, the results can be catastrophic. Inside a busy factory, workers carried on with their tasks. One man was feeding a whitish material into a massive industrial mixer. But then, his sleeve got caught. In an instant, the powerful blades dragged him inside. His coworkers froze in shock, unable to stop the machine in time. What began as routine work turned into a fatal disaster within seconds. This tragedy shows why safety guards, emergency shutoff switches, and strict training are non-negotiable when working with heavy machinery. On a rainy work site, a flatbed truck was parked, loaded with massive steel beams. A worker stood beneath the trailer, trying to make some adjustments. At first, nothing seemed unusual. He moved slowly, unaware of the danger right above him. But then, disaster struck. One of the heavy steel beams suddenly shifted loose. In a split second, the entire load slid sideways, dropping with crushing force. The worker had no time to react and was caught directly in the collapse. This terrifying moment is a harsh reminder. Never position yourself under unsecured cargo. Heavy loads must be properly strapped, braced, and checked before anyone goes near. A few seconds of caution can mean the difference between a safe shift and a life-ending tragedy. In a busy steel yard, a worker stood near heavy rolls of sheet metal as a massive coil was being moved by crane. At first, the operation looked routine. The coil dangled just above the ground as the worker prepared his task. But in seconds, disaster struck. The swinging load shifted, knocking the worker off balance and slamming him against the machinery. The raw power of the coil left him with no chance to escape. This shocking accident is a grim reminder. Heavy coils are unforgiving. Workers must never stand in the path of suspended loads. Only strict exclusion zones, proper rigging, and clear communication can prevent tragedies like this. When it comes to heavy steel, one misstep can be your last. A semi-truck was stalled right across a railway crossing. For several tense moments, the truck sat motionless on the tracks. The driver, realizing the danger, jumped out and ran to safety. Just seconds before disaster struck, a massive freight train barreled down the line at full speed, smashing straight into the trailer. The impact tore the truck apart instantly, scattering debris across the road and rail bed. Fortunately, the driver escaped unharmed, but the destruction left behind shows just how unforgiving these collisions are. Trains can't swerve, and they can't stop quickly. Blocking a crossing, even for a moment, can cost lives. This incident is a stark reminder. Never gamble with the tracks. In a busy restaurant kitchen, flames suddenly erupted from a pan of hot oil. At first, one worker tried fanning the fire, but that only fed it more oxygen, making it worse. Then, another poured water onto the flames, a deadly mistake. The water instantly turned to steam, blasting the burning oil everywhere and creating a massive fireball. This is why you must never pour water on a grease fire. The right response is simple. Turn off the heat immediately. Cover the pan with a metal lid or baking sheet to smother the flames. Use a fire blanket or Class K extinguisher if the fire is spreading. And most importantly, call for help if you can't control it within seconds. Fire safety knowledge is the difference between a small scare and a devastating disaster. In this hardware shop, a worker casually moves between tall rows of gas cylinders, but in seconds, disaster strikes. A sudden leak triggers a violent blast, shaking the entire building and filling the room with smoke and flying debris. The sheer force tears through the shop, leaving destruction everywhere. This scene is a harsh reminder. Compressed gas cylinders are not just heavy, they're potential bombs if handled carelessly. Cylinders must always be secured upright, valves checked for leaks, and storage areas kept well ventilated. Only trained staff should move or operate them, and protective gear is non-negotiable. What looks like routine handling can instantly turn deadly without strict safety discipline. Inside a busy auto workshop, a silver car sat lifted on the hoist while mechanics worked below. But then, flames suddenly erupted inside the vehicle. At first, smoke and fire flickered from the windows. Then, within seconds, the blaze grew, filling the car with bright orange flames. Workers scrambled in panic, rushing for extinguishers and moving tools out of the way. But the fire spread too fast, engulfing the car in a fiery blast. This frightening scene shows how quickly a small spark can turn into a dangerous inferno. Workshops must always keep fire extinguishers accessible, train staff in emergency response, and ensure cars are cleared of flammable materials before repairs. At a busy construction site, workers were using a mobile crane to assist in setting up a tower crane. Everything looked routine, until the mobile crane began lifting more than it could safely handle. Within seconds, the massive crane lost its balance, tilting dangerously, before crashing onto its side with a thunderous impact. Fortunately, no workers were directly struck, but the collapse could have easily caused fatalities. This accident shows the dangers of poor load calculations and unstable positioning during crane operations. Before any lift, operators must ensure the crane is properly leveled, outriggers are fully deployed, and loads stay within safe capacity limits. Heavy equipment failures like this remind us, one small miscalculation can lead to a massive disaster. At a small workshop, 2 workers were inflating a heavy truck tire. Everything seemed normal, until pressure inside the tire suddenly built up to dangerous levels. Within seconds, the tire exploded with incredible force. The blast launched debris across the workshop and shook the entire area, throwing one of the workers off his feet. This near-fatal accident is a reminder of just how dangerous tire inflation can be. Truck and heavy equipment tires store massive amounts of energy when pressurized. If handled carelessly, they can explode like a bomb. Safety cages, pressure gauges, and standing clear during inflation are non-negotiable precautions. No one was harmed here, but relying on luck is never a safety strategy. Heavy equipment failures like this remind us, one small miscalculation can lead to a massive disaster. A technician was working on a live electrical panel, trying to reset a component. At first, everything looked routine, but then, in an instant, a massive arc flash erupted, blasting out fire, heat, and blinding light. The worker was standing dangerously close, narrowly escaping what could have been life-threatening burns. Arc flashes can release temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. They cause explosions, flying shrapnel, and toxic smoke in seconds. That's why working on energized equipment is one of the deadliest mistakes on any job site. Safety must always come first. Power should be completely isolated and locked out before touching a panel. Workers must use insulated tools, wear arc-rated gloves, face shields, and full-body PPE. Clear barriers should also be set to keep others at a safe distance. Electricity doesn't give second chances. One shortcut can destroy equipment, cause permanent injuries, or take a life. Proper training, strict lockout tagout, and the right protective gear are the only shields against disasters like this. A construction site at night. Workers were busy laying materials as an excavator operated nearby. One worker, however, stood dangerously close to the rotating machine. At first, everything seemed fine, until the excavator suddenly swung its heavy arm. With no warning, the worker was caught in the danger zone. In seconds, the routine work turned into a life-threatening incident. This is why the swing radius of an excavator must always be treated as a no-go zone. Spotters should be used to guide operators. Workers must wear high-visibility clothing and maintain eye contact with machine operators. And most importantly, safety barriers should mark out the danger area so no one drifts too close. Heavy machines don't forgive mistakes. Staying alert and respecting their power is the only way to prevent tragedies like this. A worker was standing close to a delivery truck, right where pallets were being loaded by a forklift. As the forklift operator moved forward with a heavy stack, the worker remained in the danger zone, directly in the machine's blind spot. In a split second, the forklift struck him, knocking him off balance and pinning him dangerously against the side of the trailer. Situations like this highlight one of the most common causes of warehouse and loading dock injuries: working too close to moving forklifts. Safety rules are clear. Pedestrians must stay out of forklift lanes. High-visibility barriers or markings should define work zones, and operators must never move loads if people are within range. This accident could have been prevented with proper separation, communication, and strict adherence to site safety protocols. A man tries to adjust a moving belt on a grinding machine with his bare hands. At first, it looks like a simple fix, but in a split second, the belt catches him, pulling him straight into the machine. He's violently dragged down, leaving no time to react. This terrifying moment shows why exposed belts and pulleys are so dangerous. Machines should always be switched off before maintenance, and guards must be in place to prevent contact. Safety first, because one mistake can cost a life.